looks right, throws a deep pass, right side, end zone, it's caught, it's a touchdown. And the Cardinals continue to pour it on.
Welcome to Cardinals Underground.
All right, so if I start this edition of Cardinals Underground and I ask for a show of hands all the way around, you guys are going to say, now, wait a minute, hang on, Paulie Podcast. We are a multimedia, multi-platform piece of content these days. How can the folks on audio see the hands going up? I would say, Darren Urban and Kyle Odegard, the question is such a no-brainer, it becomes rhetorical when I ask, who's ready to be done with the offseason that has seemingly gone forever? Because this could be the final offseason edition of Cardinals Underground. Let that wash over you for just a minute as we try and start with some good news here, Darren. What do you think about the sounds of that?
I think it would be lovely if we actually could get to some football. And I think there's still, as we record this, some questions over, even if players are back, how much football we're going to be seeing. But the actual idea of guys getting back together in some, at least skeleton form of a team sounds wonderful to me.
Moments before we started, Kyle, there was a trailer that was issued for Hard Knocks. Just hearing the Hard Knocks music alone right there gets your juices flowing, even though all the footage was from seasons past and really it was nothing from this offseason, had nothing to do with the Rams and Chargers here in 2020. Doesn't matter. It was still a great montage of football, and it still gets you anticipating and salivating a little bit for some pigskin.
I mean, I think everybody's ready for football, but I still feel like it's a cautious anticipation because there are so many unknowns. I mean, what's it going to look like? Hopefully there aren't any setbacks, but it doesn't feel like 100% rearing to go like a general training camp because of all the questions. And going back to your raising the hand thing, you've been asking us to raise our hand on the podcast without video for years, so this doesn't really change anything.
So guilty as charged even before we were multimedia. Is that what you're saying? Okay, I got you. You know, I'm just ready. When I turn on, and this happened earlier today, when I turn on one of the ESPN talking head shows, and the question on the graphic at the bottom of the screen reads, if Patrick Mahomes retired today, would he be a Hall of Famer? Well, my hands are going up again right now. I'm done. It's like, you know how I always mark the end of training camp and the start of regular season is one of you two guys, and it's inevitable, it's an annual occurrence. One of you guys writes the long snapper story. And when the long snapper story gets filed, the profile on the team's long snapper, that's when I know, boom, week one is here. That's how I mark it.
Well, to be honest, Paul, I mean, when you start looking at what this training camp could really look like, if there aren't any preseason games to kind of like, you know, change the angle and the dynamic of what the storylines are going to be, and there might not be any padded practice for 3 or maybe even 4 weeks. Again, they're trying to work through all this stuff right now. We may be getting to that long snapper story sooner rather than later.
It is true. We might be having a mailbag every single day. Did you survive the mailbag earlier today, Darren? How'd that go?
I did survive the mailbag. That's one of the few stable pieces of content we've been able to have this offseason, given the fact nobody's been around.
I mean, Kyle, he's right, isn't he? As monotonous as the self-quarantining and the self-isolating has been, we're going to probably see a lot of that, just the football training camp version. There's going to be X number of days, ramping up, whatever that means. The testing is going to be daily for 2 weeks as of right now. And then there's going to be the strength and conditioning. There'll be a day off. I mean, it's going to be at least 20 days, like Darren said, to just get pads on. When's full contact going to commence? If there's no preseason games, which is what it appears to be, then, you know what's interesting, though? I'll throw this out. I think it was Diana Rossini, ESPN, said she talked to a head coach, and his response when he was presented with a scenario of no preseason games was, well, you know what that means? A much more physical training camp. I need to know my guys are ready for full contact football, and it actually is going to make for a more physical training camp minus the preseason games. So maybe once we get rolling, whenever that might be, it might actually be fairly substantial, Kyle.
I'll be interested to see how coaches do handle that, because if you're going full out in training camp and it's, your defense against your offense, obviously you're doubling the chances of somebody on your team getting hurt by going full tilt like that. I think that's always the question in the preseason. How much do you play your starters? And instead this year it's going to be how physical will you be in camp? And it's that line. You want to be ready and be acclimated and hit the ground running, but you also don't want injuries to key players. And Robert Alford is a guy who was day in and day out one of the guys that went really hard in training camp last year, and his battles with Damiere Byrd were great, and then it ended up in a broken leg because he went really hard, and it was a freak accident. But when you play hard, injuries happen. So I think you have to toe that line, and there's no easy answer for coaches.
When I think about that, I think of, okay, and I've heard offensive and defensive linemen talk about it's easy for them to get ready for the regular season, in most of the big guys' opinion, because they're doing a lot of 9-on-7. You're doing some other one-on-one drills. It's the guys who play in space. It's what we see the first 2 weeks when the tackling is abysmal. I think we need to prepare for a lot of that this year, because how do you practice a lot of true go, open field tackling? Really, the only reps you get here of recent years and vintage would be what you get in those preseason games for most guys, even though a lot of the starters aren't playing very many snaps. But you thought tackling was bad in years past in the first couple of weeks. Look out this year.
I think that's very possible. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Darren.
I was just going to say that's obviously very possible. It's funny. My mind wanders back to like 2011 when there was the lockout and nobody was able to do stuff with a team, although guys could kind of practice on their own. And that's what kind of happened early that season. I mean, just look at the Cardinals' first game that year where Cam Newton, as a rookie, threw for over 400 yards. And I'd have to go back to actually look at how much of that was tackling, but the defenses definitely seem to be further behind the offenses, which is funny because we always talk about how the defenses are always ahead of the offenses early in the season. And it seems to be the opposite when we're in a situation like this.
And when you look at the acclimation period, I think it's a good thing that you're starting off slowly, taking some time to figure out the testing. And I don't feel like you want to throw these guys in there quickly and start having them full contact and touching each other and knowing how contagious the coronavirus is. So I feel like they're going about it the right way. And obviously, as far as an on-field product, maybe that makes it a little sloppier early on. But when you're looking big picture at this thing, I mean, health and safety is by far the most important thing. So I think it's a good idea to figure this thing out slowly, do strength and conditioning early on and test and make sure everybody is negative for COVID-19. And then you can start moving forward once everybody kind of has that baseline and everybody's good to go.
I don't want to I'm not judging, to be honest, one way or the other, however they decide to do it. And if they decide that the smartest thing to do is to ramp up slowly, that's fine. It doesn't change realities. It doesn't change what the quality might be. And that doesn't mean that we should be more concerned about the quality of the football over health and safety. I'm not saying that at all. But again, the facts still might be that it leads to a lesser brand of football. So we'll have to see how that turns out.
So let's talk about the health protocols we know of and the safety measures as of right now. Darren, there's going to be daily testing for the first 2 weeks. So for the most part, they're on the same page, owners, players, management, and players, although we might see some further innovations, perhaps maybe something to do with the face mask. But they have most of the protocols in place theoretically based on an over 100-page document right now that's going to dictate procedures, right?
Yeah, for that part of it, sure. I think the economics of it are still being figured out, but it sounds like as we record this, that the health and safety parts of it have been agreed to between the league and the players, and that was a very important part of it. Like Kyle was saying, it makes sense to ramp up slowly and make sure these guys' bodies are in shape, and also, again, for lack of a better way to phrase it, anything to push back further the contact that football naturally brings in a world where the coronavirus is active makes sense. The question to me, honestly, is less about how it plays out on the football field and more about how this all gets handled as we go forward and these guys go home at night and they have families. And I mean, you can control it to a certain extent, but this isn't the NBA. They're not going to be in a bubble. So, how might that play out over the next few months as the season tries to get done?
I mean, we'd love to point to the NBA, which just had its most recent round of testing after a week in the bubble, and they had 0 new positive tests and 346 cases. But as Darren said, that's a bubble. It's a different dynamic than what the NFL is looking at. You look at baseball, though, and baseball has had a very low positive percentage of tests, and they're just now getting out onto the road and getting ready for the start of their season. So maybe, just maybe, we can be bullish on the NFL's chances based on what we've seen so far early on in baseball, Kyle.
Yeah, and I do feel like everybody in the sports world and beyond is really grasping the severity of it. I mean, we've been going through this for months now, and it's not something that happened for 6 weeks and then went away. Everybody understands what the coronavirus is and how contagious it can be. So I do feel like everybody's going to take this seriously. And I think maybe if this was a month, it happened, and then the season was a month later, I think guys would be going out and saying, I'm not going to catch it. Now, probably everybody knows either somebody or some sort of relation to somebody that had the coronavirus or has it. So I think they realize how realistic it is to get this, and everybody's going to be safer than they would have been a few months ago.
48 hours ago, we had 2 big concerns. We had, can they agree on the health protocols? I think we're most of the way there. And then there's the economics, Darren. You mentioned the economics earlier. And if you believe a lot of the sports business reports, most NFL teams are going to lose in the neighborhood of $100 million when you deduct all the gate revenues and everything else. I mean, you're talking over $3 billion in losses just for the league alone. So how exactly are those accounted for? Are they done this year and next year? Are they done over a 6 or 7 year timeline and spread out over future salary caps? That seems to be a point right now of negotiation at the very least. How concerned does that leave you that might derail this season?
Well, the reports that I've seen are, as long as they're going in the right direction, the good thing is some of these things don't have to be completely figured out before players report for camp and you start this process, however long it might be, of ramping up to get ready for practice. Now, they all have to be in place before games start. But if they get to the point where they for sure say, okay, we're not going to have any preseason games, that buys you all the way almost to the regular season. Now, again, there are things that need to be figured out. And it's not just, to me, the big picture, how they're going to handle the salary cap down the road. I mean, some of it, which they're all interconnected when we're talking economically, but, how are they going to handle players that want to opt out for the season for safety reasons? There are going to be some players, I don't know how many, but there'll be some players that aren't comfortable playing or have medical issues that would scare them into risking that, or even having family members where they don't feel like they can take that chance. And if you opt out, what does that mean? How much do you get paid out of your contract? Where do you stand on your contract? I know one of the NFL's proposals had that if a player opted out, you'd get X amount of, you wouldn't get your full salary, but you'd get X amount of dollars for the season, which would probably be a lot less than you would make, but a lot more than many people make in a year. But it would also mean your contract would toll. So, and what that would just mean is it's like this year didn't happen. You have a gap in your contract. For instance, Patrick Peterson is scheduled to have 1 more year on his contract and then be a free agent after the season. If he were to opt out, then all of a sudden his contract would toll. This year wouldn't matter. And then all of a sudden 2021 would be the last year of his contract. So that's what it means when you say a contract would toll. And that would be a fairly big deal for NFL players that quite frankly have shorter careers than NBA players or major league players in a lot of ways. And, to give up a year and to give up a chance to be that much closer to free agency, however you might be in your contract, I think is a significant decision to be made. And I'll be honest, Paul, I think there's going to be very few guys that ultimately say, I'm not going to play because I don't feel safe. I mean, there'll be players that say I'm concerned and I don't know how safe I feel, but I feel like they're going to end up playing anyways.
And the other big question is fully guaranteed money fully guaranteed? And that seems to be a point of discussion right now between the league and the players. What happens if a season gets interrupted? What happens if there's an incomplete season? If there's only a handful of games, then what does that mean to a player who thought he had a fully guaranteed contract? At least that's what it said, but are the provisions under which? So yes, there are still economic considerations. I know that makes me a little nervous, Kyle, just knowing that, look, the past history in any sport between labor and management, you start getting some of the dollar signs as part of the equation, then all of a sudden that's an X factor that obviously we're going to have to pay attention to over the next month.
Yeah, and it's on a very consolidated timeline where, you talk about CBA negotiations and all this. You know it's coming for a couple of years, and you can talk about things, and then obviously the pressure ramps up as the deadline gets closer. But in this case, you're trying to find out economic decisions on the fly in an ever-changing landscape. And you're right. What if the season is reduced? I mean, these guys right now get 17 paychecks once every week during the season. I mean, if you play 12 games, do you get a 12th or do you get 1/17 of your salary so every week? So it's something they have to figure out, and it's a hard thing because obviously the revenue is going to drop from the NFL side, and they don't want to take the entire brunt of it. And if you're a player, you're saying, it's not our fault. We want the money that we signed the contract for. So it is tricky. I think it's good that Major League Baseball figured it out, and these other sports leagues have negotiated it, and it is a tough negotiation, but I think both sides want the season to happen, and knowing that, I think sets them on a good path.
Kyle, are you going to miss the preseason games? Yes or no?
Honestly, yeah. Like going back to the minutia of it, I enjoy watching maybe not the long snapper competition, but seeing the undrafted wide receivers. And I remember doing a story last year on an undrafted running back that scored a touchdown, an undrafted safety that got an interception. And, everybody watches it and you don't care in the third and fourth quarter, but for these guys, they're probably not going to make the team. And to say you got an interception, even if it was in the NFL preseason, that's a pretty cool moment. And it's fun to document that sort of stuff.
And I'll be honest, Paul, when we're in the middle of preseason games, it gets a little tougher. But when and I've done a lot of training camps now, whatever it is, 20 or 21, and you go through the grind of covering those first 2.5 weeks on a daily basis and doing everything, you're ready for something besides a practice. And the other thing too is when things aren't happening, and normally you had gone through an entire offseason covering this team, the what ifs, but nothing's happened to really move the what if one way or the other. And then you get to training camp, and unless there's an injury, you're still doing what ifs with nothing to move it one way or the other. When you start actually having games, you feel like you can start to make some true analysis. It's moved the needle one way or the other. The guy played how you expected, or he played worse, or maybe he played better. And at least it moves storylines around or creates different ones when you have games on a weekly basis, even preseason games. And for people like us, that this makes it a lot harder. I mean, if we are sitting here and they all come back together and, there's not even padded practice for 3 weeks, those stories get kind of bland. There's only so many things you can say at that point. And that doesn't even include, and that's just us being selfish. That doesn't even include, what Kyle said, which is it's going to be a lot harder for some of these guys that are trying to make a team to make any inroads. We
don't even know if there's going to be 90 guys in camp yet. Does a team go with 75 or 80? Is that just to enhance social distancing? We have no idea. What does that mean? Is there going to be another Tony Jefferson, a Jerron Brown, a Gardeck the Barbarian, or any of these Zeke Turner, or any of these guys going to be able to make a team with a late run and a preseason? They're not going to have the game as a platform to try and showcase their skills, obviously. You're not going to see Strebler the leveler out there in the fourth quarter this year at all. So, we're missing mandatory leveler in this thing. I'm with you, Kyle. All of a sudden, when it's not there, you don't have it all around it, to kick around anymore. The preseason game, it's not that marker, that finish line that gets you through segments of the preseason. Not to mention, I know I was looking forward to going to Vegas and opening up that brand new stadium, Cardinals and Raiders. That was going to be a cool experience.
Yeah, not to mention your all-nighter on the Strip the night before, probably showing up at the game without any sleep.
That would be the first time.
And
is this on? Oh, I'm sorry.
Paul's still bitter the fact that he lost out on his his all-nighter possibilities when he was in Vegas right when COVID was hitting. So he was hoping to get back there and light it up.
You know what I'm really going to miss is calling the fourth preseason game and doing my entire spotting board, right? And you have all 180 players on the board. And then right before the game, they finally make it official. And the first 37 guys on your board aren't playing. And you're just marking off all these names and numbers and you're doing. So yeah, even that fourth preseason game, the experience thereof, it's going to be tough for coaches. That's my takeaway. I mean, Darren, would you agree with that? I mean, it's going to be tough for coaches and some of the personnel decision makers to try and figure out. I think there's going to be some misses on talent because they're just not going to have the ability to see some of these guys.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any question that that's going to hamper. The funny thing is like, I think if you did any one of these things and you took it away, I don't think it's that huge of a deal. The problem is they lose everything. I mean, if you're in a situation where you lose, take Isaiah Simmons, for instance. And obviously he's making this team, but we don't know where he's going to be. I mean, the off-season work and the OTAs were going to be that chance for the coaches to kind of mess around with him. I mean, I know they said they wanted to put him in one place and have him learn it, but they could have put him in a bunch of different places on a couple different days and say, oh, you know what, today, let's kind of see where he is here just to give us a sense of if it makes sense to him. So they lose that possibility. Then you take away the preseason games. We don't know how he's going to react, under the lights, as, Bruce Arians always liked to say, and how he would play once the spotlight is on. Now, he playing at Clemson, he's probably going to be fine, but you still would have liked to see that. And then you add in the third thing, which is the possibility that you could have 2 weeks of padded practice, maybe 3, if things work out and they ramp it way up, but they wanted to keep the game starting at the normal time. So he would have even less regular practice on top of everything else. When you talk about Isaiah Simmons, that's hard enough. I can't even imagine being an undrafted guy trying to make an impression when you're going to get 3 weeks of practice, limited reps because other guys have to get reps, no preseason games, no offseason to show anybody anything. I mean, I don't even know. You would really, really have to stand out quickly and really out there for a coach to say, I want to keep this guy over a veteran who I know has done it in this league.
For example, Kyle, if there was a traditional offseason this year, would the Cardinals have signed veteran offensive tackle Kelvin Beachum? When I saw that signing, I said, okay, time sign, not the first time, but they're pretty deep at offensive tackle after this offseason. Is that because they don't know enough about Josh Jones yet? They're not secure enough, confident enough in any of the rookies to be counted upon if needed early in this season. And because of that, we better get a veteran tackle in here with the unknown being Josh Jones. What do we do at left tackle if, knock on wood, something were to happen? To me, that Kelvin Beachum, it really does make me wonder at the very least if that's a byproduct of the rookies just being so unknown and unproven right now.
Yeah, it's hard to know the exact motivation. You're right. It could be because you think Josh Jones can fill in at left tackle, but you certainly don't want to be in a bind if DJ Humphries goes down and then you have somebody out there that's too raw and can't hold up against all these elite edge rushers. And another factor is maybe they saw value. He didn't get the contract he wanted in free agency and decided, hey, I'll go to Arizona because I can lock down a roster spot. I'm not exactly sure why it happened, but you're right. I mean, it just adds in more depth to tackle, and it's pretty amazing thinking back to last year when Marcus Gilbert got hurt. You were onto a waiver claim as your backup right tackle, and luckily Justin Murray turned out well. But you compare the depth at tackle last season compared to what you have now, it's night and day, and that's one of the most critical positions on the entire offense. So I think the Cardinals are in good shape at tackle, and Kelvin Beachum just fortifies that more.
And maybe that's the answer right there. Just based on last year, just the bind the Cardinals were left in last year when Marcus Gilbert went down the first game week of the season. God forbid you would have Josh Jones out there unprepared as a rookie with no preseason games under his belt, and all of a sudden it's week 1. DJ Humphries has just pulled a hamstring and he's going against Nick Bosa, right? I mean, that's the last thing you want in that situation. You go with a guy who started 99 games under his belt, Kelvin Beachum. So yeah, I can see the logic in it. And you know what? If you're so stacked at offensive tackle by the end of camp, guess what? Maybe someone even trades for a Kelvin Beachum who's really in need.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think depth is so crucial this year, especially. And normally it is because of injuries, but we don't know how this is going to play out. We don't know who's going to test positive. We don't know, what could happen in terms of losing a guy for a week or two because of COVID. We just don't know. And I think if you have a chance to stack up some players on your roster and make the decisions later on who might stick around for the regular season, I say go for it. And, we'll have to see how Beachum plays and where he fits. And, to me, part of what I thought of when they signed Kelvin Beachum was it just, to me, it really underscores, because people were wondering, all right, Josh Jones played left tackle exclusively in college. Do you maybe play him on the left side? This now gives them the opportunity to say, Josh Jones, you're going to be our right tackle. We just re-signed DJ Humphries for 3 seasons. We want you to be a right tackle. I don't want you thinking about left tackle, because if DJ Humphries gets hurt, we might need to put you over there. Now we got a guy who can already be there. You worry about right tackle. You worry about learning this position, because this is where ultimately we want to put you.
All right, as long as we're talking about the rookies, Kyle. So Isaiah Simmons, Josh Jones. How about the 2 fourth-rounders, the 2 defensive linemen, Lecky Fotu and Rashard Lawrence? What do you think no offseason means for those guys? And based on the position and the nature of their job assignments, do you expect to see them in the rotation? Are these guys you can just plug in and say, look, you got the B gap, go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about like the intricacies of the defensive line, but it doesn't look super complicated. Maybe, I don't know if I'm speaking at a turn there, but like, yeah, if it's a goal line situation or a short yardage and you just have to hold up at the line of attack there and just push against the center and the guard, maybe they can do it early. And when you start doing stunts and different things, then it gets a little bit more confusing. But I feel like if those guys are brought in to be run stuffers early on, you can figure that out in camp, where we're only going to play you 25% of the time. These are your sub packages you're going to play in, and just master these. And then we can kind of expand as the season goes on if you prove that you should be on the field more.
What about the last 2 rookies in this draft class, Darren? I mean, Evan Weaver, Eno Benjamin, you think one or the other is more likely to see time, especially when you consider for the lack of an offseason?
I don't know if I would say one or the other is more likely to see time. I mean, I guess when you look at what the running back situation is and how running backs can get hurt, you would think Eno Benjamin would be in a better spot, especially since Evan Weaver plays inside linebacker. And unfortunately for Evan Weaver, it would have been better for him to be drafted in the 2019 draft class for the Cardinals, because then the inside linebacker position was so in flux that maybe he had a spot. Now he's coming to a place where the number 1 draft pick's an inside linebacker. One of the top free agents signed was an inside linebacker. You're all of a sudden you've got all these people in front of you, and Evan Weaver's really going to have to make an impression on special teams. And oh, by the way, the only way he's going to be able to do that is in practices where it's not like you're going full speed and playing kamikaze special teams like you might in a preseason game. You're going to have to like show it otherwise. So I think he's going to have a more of a steep climb. I mean, Eno Benjamin's in a spot where DJ Foster is coming off the injury. Obviously, you have Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake, but you always need a bunch of running backs. And Eno Benjamin was very productive in college, and you've got Kenyon Drake going into another free agent year, so you don't know what his future is. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for Eno Benjamin to be ahead on that if you're comparing those 2 guys, but again, I think being draft picks in this situation puts them in a much better place than had they been undrafted.
I saw an interview with Kyler Murray, and I think he was on First Take, and he was talking about the run game and how that wasn't just an adjustment last year. That's part of the Cardinals' DNA on offense now, part of their identity. Are you buying that, Kyle? As we're getting ticking and we're going close to the start of camp and the Cardinals actually taking the field sometime in the near future, what do you think? Are they truly tracking to be a balanced offense, like at least they're trying to portray themselves as?
Yeah, I guess it's how you define balanced. If we flash back a year, I think clearly the running game is a bigger part of the Cardinals than a lot of us maybe expected it to be. I don't think it's a slam dunk that they do a bunch of 10 personnel this year and throw it all around. But at the same time, I do think that when all things are equal, Cliff Kingsbury would rather pass because he knows it's more efficient to throw the ball. He knows that, the big plays come out of that. If you're super efficient in the run game, he's obviously going to use it. And I do think they're going to be, because I think the scheme and what Kyler Murray brings lends itself to efficiency. You look at the way mobile quarterbacks hurt defenses, and Lamar Jackson last year, but even go back to Tyrod Taylor and other guys. I mean, you can get some yards on the ground with the mobile quarterback, but we've seen Kyler Murray throw the ball too, and he's just this elite guy where he can do both really well. So I do think if the passing game is clicking, Cliff Kingsbury is going to lean on it.
Speaking of Kyler, there's sort of been a late surge over the last month or two of the offseason of a lot of accolades, national talk of MVP consideration in the race and the Vegas odds. And I even saw something on NFL Network where they had a question: if you had to pick a coach quarterback combo in the near future to stay together and win a Super Bowl, and Jane Slater took the Cardinals, Kyler and Cliff, and all that publicity, is that good or bad, Darren? Does that give you pause or concern at all? An offseason where you're coming off 5 wins, yet you're getting a lot of run as being a sleeper team this year.
I could be wrong, Paul, but this offseason and this season is so different. I really don't think it means jack squat. I mean, I think players are going to be so focused because of how weird everything is in training camp and the season that I think a lot of the outside noise is going to get ignored because they just won't have the ability to wrap their head around it. I know I was talking on a different radio show, Red Sea Report, and for me, we can talk about hype and we can talk about where everybody's supposed to be, but nobody knows what the implications are of how this season must be run and what it might mean in terms of trickling on the field. And I'm going beyond, like, if a guy gets sick and you have to quarantine him. I'm even talking about, at one point, our good friend Craig Grillo was talking about how, the Cardinals have leadership like Larry Fitzgerald in the locker room to make sure everything's focused. And I said, but here's the problem. Larry Fitzgerald isn't necessarily going to be in the locker room with everybody, because when this is all said and done, they're not going to be able to get the entire roster into one locker room. And so he's not going to spend as much time with his teammates. There's going to be no full team meetings at any point live. They'll be virtual because you can't afford to have all these people in one room. How does that impact all this? How does it impact chemistry? How does that impact the cohesiveness of a team? I'm not saying it's going to at all, but we don't know. And I think going back to your original question with the hype, I just feel like there's so much other stuff that people are thinking about. I think it's much more likely that a team gets derailed because they're not handling the COVID protocols better, or lack of practice, or how they have to practice. I think that's more of a problem, a potential problem, than it getting in their head that everybody thinks we're going to be great.
I mean, if all the accolades and the acclaim leads to being comfortable, everyone's out of their comfort zone right now, and going to be out of your comfort zone for the foreseeable future. So to Darren's point, Kyle, just the fact that everything's going to be new and there's going to be so much attention paid on just staying healthy and safe, maybe that precludes against any overconfidence.
And this team won 5 games a year ago. It's not like they should be puffing their chest out for anything they've done. And I think hype is fine. I mean, it's cool that people are talking about you, and they're talking about you because it's warranted with the way you played down the stretch and the moves that were made in the offseason. And it's fun to hear people excited about your team and your players. So I think they're going to handle it fine. And I mean, Kyler Murray had all sorts of hype in college, and he went and won the Heisman Trophy. It's not like all these guys have been derailed. They've been hyped up their entire lives, and they've made the NFL, and a lot of them have become stars. So I think it's cool. I mean, you want to be talked about, and they are, and whether they play well or not, I don't think the outside stuff matters. I think maybe when you get all that stuff, and then, like you said, if you stop working hard or completely buy into it and you don't give your all, then it's a factor. But I don't think that's realistic in the NFL. I mean, the Chiefs were hyped last year, and then they won the Super Bowl, and the Patriots have been hyped every year, and they're always good. So there's teams that don't live up to the hype, and there's teams that live up to it, and I don't think it's because of the hype.
I'm going to ask you guys for the one, maybe two biggest questions you want an answer to by the time we're done with camp. I'm going to give you a moment to think about it, as I remind everyone that you can help team up with the Cardinals and State Farm to help 3,000 students in the Tempe Elementary School District during a back-to-school drive. It's going on now through this Friday. Just go to azcardinals.com/back-to-school to donate a supplies kit, backpack, or both for a young student in need, and there are plenty right now. Once again, azcardinals.com/back-2-and-school. So, Darren, to you, what do you think? If you needed one or two questions answered coming out of this camp, what would they be?
I guess my two would be, and I know I'm picking low-hanging fruit here. Number one is going to be, what are you going to do with Isaiah Simmons? Especially knowing that A, you've got De'Vondre Campbell, and B, you've had almost no ability to figure out what he can do on the NFL level in terms of work. So what are you going to do with Isaiah Simmons? I think the other one would be, how does DeAndre Hopkins mesh in this offense, and what does that mean for the rest of the receivers at this point? Where is Larry Fitzgerald playing? Where are you putting Christian Kirk? Does Andy Isabella have a role? We all know that the Hopkins trade was a huge one for this team, but you still haven't had a chance to put him with the other guys and figure out exactly how it's going to go. I have much less concern that that's going to be an issue than maybe what happens with Isaiah Simmons given his rookie status, but I still think it's a question that needs to be figured out.
All right, Kyle, what do you think?
My two would be the cornerbacks. I mean, you look at Patrick Peterson, Robert Alford, and Byron Murphy, and I think there's a ceiling that's pretty high and there's a floor that can be low because of things you saw last year, from injuries to ineffectiveness and the suspension, knowing the ages of Alford and Peterson, and Murphy's on the other side where he's still young. So I feel like all three of those guys have talent, and we could turn around in week 4 and you could have a really good cornerback group, or we could turn around and they could be struggling because of various factors. So how the quarterbacks play, I think, is going to be key. And then on the offensive side of the ball, will Kyler become elite like a lot of people are projecting? And if so, I mean, Cliff Kingsbury has this star quarterback, and now that he has the weapons and the personnel, is Cliff just going to kind of pick up where he left off last year, and like the Cleveland game where everything was just rolling and everything he called turned out pretty well? When he has the weapons, is he that type of coach where he can pick apart defenses from a game plan perspective and really make an offense hum? And I think those two things are the biggest to me for 2020.
I probably would have gone cornerback. So since you grabbed that one from me, I'm going to go
intercepted.
The edge rusher opposite Chandler Jones. Are they going to get an effective edge rush? Devon Kennard looks to be a nice signing. That looks to be, a nice way to address that need. Is that going to be enough? Will Hassan Reddick develop? Will that be something that they identify as perhaps by the end of camp they're trying to do something like that? Would Isaiah Simmons be an X factor off the edge in some of those passing down situations? I could see some of that. The other one I'll throw out there, and this really isn't a slam on Mason Cole. It's more of a compliment to A.Q. Shipley. And he graded out very highly last year. And I am curious to see how that plays out with a quarterback in his second year, and you're going with a young center as well. Exactly, is that going to be a liability, or is it going to be a step back at all, the center position? I know Mason Cole has the upside, and he even has the experience of starting his entire rookie year. But is that something we're going to be talking about? And could he actually get a dark horse run out of a Lamont Gilliard, for example, at the center position?
I think those are fair questions on both of them. I mean, the center one in particular, I think we talked obviously earlier about tackle. I feel like the guards are fairly set, and obviously both coming back. Mason Cole does have a full year of experience. It was 2 years ago, but at least he played a year. He knows what you're getting into. But, I do think there is some, I don't want to say hesitancy, but you got to see what he's got. And again, this all goes back to what we started with, which is, what is this training camp going to look like? What can you get out of it? How much can you ramp up? Is it going to be a situation where the veterans are so much further ahead because they know what it's like to play in this league, and guys that don't have a lot of experience are going to be left swimming a little bit? I'm curious to know.
I mean, for example, it's league-wide, this uncertainty. Even in the last 12 hours before we recorded this podcast, the Jets and Giants came out and said no fans, at least to start the season, for the foreseeable future. The Packers came out and said, well, I could see us putting 10 or 12,000 fans in there. We have an 81,000 seat capacity at Lambeau. Now, that's if fans are even allowed. That would obviously be a league-wide stipulation. You saw the AD of Texas say, no, we can go 50% capacity for the college football season. There's just so much uncertainty. I even saw Sean McVay say, and I don't know if this is part of the Hard Knocks coverage, but he told the media just recently that he's confident there'll be a season, but he's skeptical that it will be on the calendar we all think it'll be, meaning there'll be an interruption or a delay to the season. That was Sean McVay. So to Darren's point, the uncertainty isn't just, on the field and with the players and the coaches. You had zoom out, it obviously encircles the entire league at this point. And so with that in mind, we kind of come full circle on Cardinals Underground, Kyle. I mean, the uncertainty is going to reign. And that's, if nothing else, is going to be a storyline as they slowly ramp up and do the daily testing. I'm sure that'll be most of the questioning if and when we even get to interview players.
Yeah, and I think there should be some optimism taken from, like we've talked about, the NBA doing pretty good and Major League Baseball and the NHL and having this relatively under control for those guys. And if you can follow their protocols and take a page out of their book, then hopefully you can stay on schedule. But you're right. I mean, it only takes one bad scenario to really derail a team. And then what happens if a team isn't ready to go a certain week, and what do you do? So I think there have to be a lot of contingency plans and flexibility, but this is certainly going to be one of the most interesting seasons in NFL history. And in a perfect world, you play it on time, but if not, hopefully they can adapt it and get it done.
So, Darren, did you get any questions on if Patrick Mahomes was to retire now, if he'd be a Hall of Famer? Did you get any of those in the mailbag, despite the fact he's like 24 and he's due $500 million? I'm sure, retirement's even a consideration at this point.
And he's played essentially two seasons. I mean, I like Pat Mahomes. I think he's the best quarterback in the league right now, but that's a little premature for my taste. Yeah.
I'd take him over Terrell Davis.
Fair.
He had
That's
4
fair.
seasons.
I can only hope, without preseason games, that Streveler the Leveler will at least be able to run a scout team, run like a full contact scrimmage scout team of sorts against the number one defense. Because to your point, Kyle, they're not going to probably go number 1-0 against number 1 D, but if they really want to give the D a full contact look, there could be a scout team of sorts. And how about Streveler doing his Taysom Hill out there? That would be something we'd look forward to in camp.
And in all seriousness for him, I mean, it's going to have to show within a few weeks that, hey, I'm going to be a valued member of this team where I can catch the ball and run the ball and throw the ball. I mean, it's not easy to incorporate a Taysom Hill type player into the game plan. And if you do it, you have to have 100% certainty that this guy is going to add some value to your offense. So for him, it's like you got to come in and show this entire skill set really quickly and then maybe contribute on special teams. It's a lot for a guy like Chris Streveler.
By the way,
squads are probably going to be bigger, Paul.
Yeah, that's true. Will each team have its own practice squad, or could there be a pool practice squad for the league where teams take guys off?
No. Every team's going to have their own practice squad. And you're still going to have to go through rules of getting them through waivers, but ultimately, for the same reason all these teams are going to have a hard time figuring out younger guys. I think if you're cutting a younger guy to put him on your practice squad, I don't see a lot of other teams swooping in and taking them, because you're going to want guys in such a short time frame. You're going to want guys that know what they're doing. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination in terms of, half of our practice squad are going to be guys from other teams, because you're going to want guys that know what they're doing heading right into the regular season.
There's going to be no like coaches trying to figure out, do we actually dare put this guy in a preseason game? What if he shines? What if he pops and all of a sudden he's out on film, right? Because Bruce Arians told the story recently
about that.
These are the Steelers. And they're like, well, should we put Antonio Brown out there? Yeah, throw him out there for a series. Well, he busts off like an 88-yard touchdown catch and run. And Bruce Arians with the Steelers like, well, we got to keep him on the 53 now. There's no chance of putting him on the practice squad. So
that's probably a good Antonio decision. Brown's retiring here, Paul?
No. By the way, I just figured out there's only one, and I'm only one potential upside to this whole situation, the pandemic, and that is I actually have a plausible out if and when my Paulie Pigskin breakout players of camp flame out this year. Because if you're talking about JoJo Ward of Hawaii and Zane Lewis, the cornerback out of Air Force, my Pigskin breakout players of camp, well, you know, they're obviously not going to get a chance to shine in preseason games. How are they going to show their wares?
Paul, you're good for like a decade. You were on the Kyler Murray train in the very beginning driving it. You can miss on the next 10 years worth of players. You nailed Kyler Murray. It doesn't matter after that.
And Darren's laughing because he's about to cite the Max Hall, but I want the record to reflect that the Max Hall was a prediction. It's only out of camp. It's only during and out of camp. I'm not projecting any NFL career success. I'm just saying it's going to shine at camp.
Max Hall won his first start. That's all that matters.
That's true.
He almost got decapitated on his touchdown, or Levi Brown's touchdown, but he won.
Yeah. I'm not sure in all my years on the sideline I've ever winced as hard as that touchdown effort by Max Hall. I mean, that was the epitome of the term ragdoll. He got ragdolled. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully
right,
Schebler doesn't have that happen to him.
All right, there you go. That'll do it for this edition of Cardinals Underground.